So yes, hello and welcome everyone to today's political discourse presentation discussing nuclear weapons and energy. Before we begin, I just want to thank you all for your time. I know I speak on behalf um, of every one of the Youth Action Campaign members that we are incredibly grateful and excited for this opportunity, like Mr. Thomas said. But without further ado, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our presenters for today.
Yes, hello everybody and esteemed guests. My name is Preston Nguyen, and a little bit about me is I'm a current rising junior in high school. I currently live in Houston, Texas, in the United States. And a little bit about me is I've been volunteering with the American Red Cross since 2022. And some notable positions I've held is this year I was the International Humanitarian Law Youth Action Campaign team lead, and it was a very great experience. I learned a lot. And in addition to that, I just joined the youth engagement team for my local Red Cross chapter, and I was elected to become my school's Red Cross president for the 2024-2025 school year.
Awesome. And I am Sienna Eggman. I am an incoming senior at 17 years old. I am a proud representative of Asia Pacific region, and I currently live in Iwakuni, Japan. It is my second year as a Youth Action Campaign member. Next slide. Okay, so for today's presentation, it'll be split into four chapters. One, we'll be going over nuclear weapons and energy. Secondly, we'll highlight recent events and analyze whether or not they comply with international humanitarian law. Third, we have advocacy. And lastly, we'll end with our mission. To start us off with one and two, we have Preston.
Thanks so much, Sienna. So first, I'll dive into nuclear weapons and energy and how they exactly comply with international humanitarian law. So what are nuclear weapons? Nuclear weapons are powerful devices that release energy through nuclear reactions, causing massive explosions. There are two main types, strategic and tactical. Strategic nuclear weapons are designed for large-scale destruction and can destroy even entire cities. In contrast, tactical nuclear weapons have a smaller explosive yield and are intended for battlefield use. So looking at history, nuclear weapons were first used in World War II on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During the Cold War, there was a significant arms race between the US and Soviet Union, leading to a buildup of large nuclear arsenals. Today, these weapons are primarily kept as deterrents to prevent attacks by ensuring mutual destructions. There are also ongoing efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons to other countries and non-state actors. Next, I'll dive into nuclear energy. So nuclear energy is generated through controlled nuclear reactions, primarily for producing electricity. The first commercial nuclear power plants appeared in the 1950s. However, major accidents like Chernobyl in 1986 and Fukushima in 2011 have demonstrated the potential risks and challenges associated with nuclear energy. So what is the current context of nuclear energy? Currently, nuclear energy is part of the debate about sustainable energy sources. It is seen as a low-carbon option that can help combat climate change. Countries like France and the United States use nuclear energy extensively because it provides a stable supply and reduces dependence on fossil fuels. Next, I'll get into complying with international humanitarian law. Next slide, please. So nuclear weapons have certain benefits, such as deterring potential attacks and maintaining strategic stability by balancing power among nations. However, they also have significant drawbacks. The humanitarian impacts include potential civilian casualties and long-term health effects, while environmental damage can lead to lasting ecological problems. So what is a current event that comply with international humanitarian law? Recently, in May 2024, Putin ordered military drills involving nuclear weapons in response to perceived threats from the West. This move has heightened the risk of nuclear conflict and violates the international humanitarian law by posing a direct threat to civilian safety. So what are some pros and cons of nuclear energy? Nuclear energy is seen as a reliable low-carbon source of power, which is beneficial for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It also seems as a significant risks such as long-term consequences and nuclear accidents and challenges of managing radioactive waste. So what is another event that complies with the international humanitarian law? In 2022, escalating tensions between Israel and Iran raised concerns about the potential for nuclear conflict. This situation highlights the risk of nuclear proliferation and the challenges related to adhering to international humanitarian law. So what are some case studies? Recent events illustrates violations of international humanitarian law. For instance, tactical nuclear weapon drills, threaten civilian lives, and fail to adhere to IHL. Principles like distinction and proportionality were violated. Similarly, the risk of nuclear escalation between Israel and Iran violates principles of humanity, proportionality, and distinction by endangering civilian populations. So what are some ethical considerations when it comes to this? When discussing nuclear technology, we must balance its dual-use dilemma, its potential for both protection and threat. There's also an ethical responsibility to consider the long-term impact on future generations and ensure that any use of nuclear technology does not compromise their safety. Ethical recommendations. To address the ethical concerns related to nuclear technology, we recommend strengthening international treaties to reduce nuclear arsenals, enhancing oversight and regulation of nuclear energy, and promoting education to raise awareness about international humanitarian law and ethical considerations related to nuclear issues. Thank you for your detailed attention to these topics. Now I'm pleased to introduce Sienna Igman, who will discuss the role of advocacy in addressing nuclear issues. Sienna, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Preston. As previously mentioned, current events have highlighted that nuclear weapons and energy have been on the uprise. As an advocate for IHL, it truly is disheartening to be a witness of those events. And it's for you all who are forefront change makers against such uses and even have experienced firsthand the impacts of nuclear weapons. I can only imagine how overbearing it is to see the threat be increasingly imminent. I think especially in such times, the efforts of advocacy and hope in general can be greatly overlooked. But it is through our continued effort, through disarmament, through regulation and education, that we can work towards creating a more peaceful world. With these recent events in mind, we have to remember that advocation is still present and has been since August 6th, 1955, which was the first World Conference against atomic and hydrogen bombs held in Hiroshima. Next, in August 5th, 1963, the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed in Moscow by the Soviet Union, UK, and US, which prohibited the testing of nuclear weapons underwater, in the atmosphere, or in outer space. And this greatly limited potentially harmful climate impacts. And in 1968 to 1970, the Soviet Union, UK, and US signed the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and they agreed not to assist other states in obtaining or producing nuclear weapons. And in September 24th, 1966, the US signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, also known as the CTBT, um, and that bans all nuclear explosions, whether for military or for peaceful purposes. At the moment, we are arguably making the biggest steps towards disarmament that we've ever had, and that is through the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, also known as the TPNW, which is the biggest treaty towards disarmament, and through ICAN, also known as the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which is a main supporter of the treaty. So, as members of the next generation, we intend to continue the legacy that you all have laid out for us. And I just want to take the next slide to highlight what our mission is as YAC members and what it means to us. So, the Youth Action Campaign, it's a program that empowers youth and young adults to learn about international humanitarian law. And members expand nationwide and internationally. Through this, we explore IHL topics with our respective communities through peer-to-peer education, and collectively, thousands of campaigns are done each year. And with that, IHL members become forefront leaders towards a peaceful world, guiding our communities along the way. So now, what does this all mean? How can we move the discussion towards what action should be done looking into the future? We believe that it comes down to these three steps: educating, enforcing, and establishing. Educating communities is crucial in this process because it creates awareness on the topic, and awareness often sparks change. However, there are further steps that can be taken along with educating communities. It is also important for politicians to enforce IHL international laws, military rules, and training to prohibit further environmental damages and casualties from nuclear weapons. But if we just establish these rules without consequences, what will inhibit countries from violating IHL? So to combat this and to truly make a change, we must establish concrete and historical precedent for prosecuting environmental and civilian damage from nuclear weapons. This establishment will set a precedent that countries will look at before planning attacks and offer historical examples of the aftermaths of the usage of nuclear weapons on civilian areas. They will see what has happened to previous parties that have damaged the environment and will consider the effects that their military attacks and nuclear weapon launches could have on the civilian population and the environment. Following through with these three crucial actions will steer us towards the right path: the path towards world peace and the preservation of IHL along with our climate. To wrap up this presentation, here's a quote from Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General. "A peaceful future depends on ending the nuclear threat." This message emphasizes the need for empathy to be created in our communities and our governments to understand the importance of striving for world peace. So, thank you again, esteemed guests, for joining us here today and listening to our presentation.